Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Maura Sullivan. I'm the CEO of the ARC of Massachusetts, and I'm grateful that we have this time together and this opportunity to convene these key leaders from Governor Healey's administration with over 630 people who are joining us through Zoom and overflow to Facebook Live. What an incredible showing of community engagement. Thank you for that. And for those of you who are newer to the ARC of Massachusetts, I'll take a minute to tell you about us. We are the leading advocacy organization for people with autism and intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we're representing and advocating for over 250,000 individuals and families in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Our focus for over 70 years has been on making legal and social change. And as the new CEO, I'm in about 2 months now, I just couldn't be prouder to serve this extraordinary community. So before I jump in and ask our esteemed panel to introduce themselves, I want to share our agenda for the next hour. After introductions and my opening questions for the panelists, we will transition to the Q&A segment. So please put your questions or comments in the Q&A feature. And my Director of Government Affairs, Nora Bent, who you can see on the screen, and I will do our best to select the questions, as many as possible in the time frame we have allotted. And one reminder is just that your questions really shouldn't be regarding personal situations. So let's turn to the panel. Thank you so much for being here today and for the work that you do each day to support our community. We're really looking forward to having a productive conversation to hear about the work that the Healey-Driscoll administration is doing to prepare for this incoming presidential administration, and the ways that we can work together to support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, including autism. We know that many in our community have concerns about the president-elect, given the proposals that were made on the campaign trail and actions that were taken in the previous administration. And while we're hopeful for progress, we also know that advocacy is critical to safeguard against any potential threats to the needed programs that support our community. So we know that you need to hear our voices, and we need you, the governor's administration, plus our legislature, as we stand side by side and look forward to growing this partnership. So why don't we get started with some introductions? And I think I'll open it up right away to the Undersecretary, Mary McGowan, if you want to take a minute to introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you. And thank you, Maura, for inviting us here today. We're thrilled to be here and really thrilled to have you in this position. I've been fortunate enough to have worked with you in your previous capacity, but couldn't be happier that we have an opportunity to deepen that relationship. As Maura said, my name is Mary McGowan. I'm the Undersecretary of Human Services at the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. As folks may or may not know, HHS is the largest secretariat in state government. We have 11 state agencies, plus Mass Health. And just a real quick rundown, that includes the Departments of Public Health, Transitional Assistance, Mental Health, Children and Families, Youth Services, Mass Ability, Mass Commission for the Blind, Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Office of Refugees and Immigrants, and of course, the Department of Developmental Disabilities. We touch probably about 1 in every 3 residents of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thrilled to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here and for all of your work and for your openness around communication with our community. I'm happy to also have Commissioner Sarah Peterson introduce herself. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Maura. I'm happy to be here. today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to hear from folks about what their concerns are. As Maura said, my name is Sarah Peterson. I am the Acting Commissioner of the Department of Developmental Services. I've been in the role since the beginning of September of this year. And for folks who don't know, DDS is the state agency that provides supports for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Massachusetts, including autism. The department serves just over 49,000 adults and children across the state. And I'm just happy to be here, and thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you, and thank you for taking on this role. Okay, let's move to the Executive Director of the Mass Office on Disability, Mary Mahone Macaulay.
Thank you very much, Maura. And congratulations. I'm glad you are the new Executive Director. It's a good pick. So my name is Mary Mahone Macaulay, as Maura stated, and I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Office on Disability. I myself have been an advocate for people with disabilities, I would say, since the late 1970s. I began with the state government in 1989, and I'm mentioning that because my first 30 years with state government through 2019 was with Massability, formerly known as the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission. So my major focus was the vocational rehabilitation, assisting individuals with employment to get to work, and I worked in a variety of capacities within that agency. I've been with Mass Office on Disability for about 5.5 years now. And just to give a brief overview of who we are, because sometimes there's some misconceptions of what we do and who we are. But we're an agency that offers training, information, guidance regarding disabilities. We really share with individuals that call, with other agencies within the state, what the laws are, what the regulations are regarding people with disabilities, what the obligations are, as well as the rights for people with disabilities. We've done that since 1981, when this agency was, it originated in 1981. And I'm just very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting Mass Office on Disability to be part of the panel today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for your leadership. I want to also let Julia O'Leary introduce herself. She's the General Counsel at the Mass Office on Disability as well, and a great contact.
Hi, folks. I'm Julia O'Leary. I am the General Counsel at Mass Office on Disability with Director Macaulay, and she put it pretty well what we do.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I think we want to get right into some questions and really, take a serious note here on some of the issues that we're facing. I think all of you know, following the November election, many in our community are feeling scared and vulnerable. And I'm wondering if you can share how the Healey-Driscoll administration is preparing to support specifically individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, including autism and their families as we go forward. Undersecretary, do you want to kick it off? Or?
Sure, I'll be happy to kick it off. I guess first, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge how important your concerns are. Changes at the federal level, no matter which candidate you voted for, can feel uncertain and unsettling. And especially when it comes to programs that so many of you and other families rely on for really critical services. And I speak for myself, and I think my fellow panelists, that we understand the anxiety that this creates, and we really share your commitment to wanting to protect the well-being of individuals with disabilities. And I think we should all take great pride that here in Massachusetts, we have a really long and strong history of being a leader in disability rights and services. And I keep saying, and again, I know, Sarah and her colleagues share this, our job, our commitment hasn't changed, and it won't change on January 21st. We remain deeply committed to ensuring that individuals with disabilities have access to the supports they need. And again, that's regardless of the changes at the federal level. And we'll continue to prioritize programs here in our own state that promote independence, dignity, and the quality of life for every resident. Meanwhile, I mean, we do have some really good safeguards in place, and Maura mentioned a really important one. We have a really strong legislative support. There are champions in our legislature. We also have really great advocacy partners, and that the ARC is certainly one of them. And there are many others. And these collaborations and partnerships really will work to help shield our community from negative potential changes. And by the way, I should point out that there's federal dollars, and there's also our own state budget and policies. And in many cases, our state commitment through our budget and our policies really go on in really significant ways to ensure continuity of care for individuals with disabilities. I just alluded to this, but we're just not alone on this. We collaborate closely with ARC, with national organizations, with other state agencies, with other stakeholders to monitor what's going on at the federal level, and to work and provide information to these organizations so that they can use that information in a way that may help advocate and advance their causes. If there are any proposed changes at the federal level, we're going to work tirelessly to advocate for policies that protect our vulnerable populations. I guess I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'll let Executive Director McCauley say a few words. But the other thing is really one of transparency and communication. I mean, I think always communication is so important. And yet at times like this, during transition, I think it's even more important that folks really stay connected and share what they're hearing on the ground, as well as what we're hearing from our partners at the federal level. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we were so eager to come today, to be able to hear from this community about what your concerns are, so that we don't assume anything, and that we make sure we're taking those to heart. Those are some thoughts. Executive Director McCauley, I don't know if you want to add a few words.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. A couple of key points that I want to bring up is that, as far as how we are going, Massachusetts, how the state's going to react to possible changes or adjustments or anything that's coming with the new administration, there's no strong, specific, detailed answer, because first we need to see what the action is on the federal level. So that's very important. Oftentimes people have a lot of anticipatory anxiety or get nervous and very upset about things that might or may happen. And what I would say to everyone is, we need to just stay in the moment, stay in the day. It's not January 21st yet. Different things will happen, as they always do with the new federal administration. There have been, presidents going into the past that have shifted things here and there in different ways. But as far as the rights for people with disabilities, including people with intellectual developmental disabilities and autism, those rights, they're not partisan. They're not on one side of the ticket. They're not with the Green Party, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. They're people's rights. And that's really important to realize, that it's not the work that we do in the state is really important. And as Mary said pretty clearly, we have a good track record in Massachusetts of paying close attention to people with all types of disabilities, and really in assisting with empowerment, and wanting to see more people employed, more individuals with disabilities being able to be live on their own and really take care of themselves in various ways. And that's been a commitment of the state under a lot of different governors, while we've had a lot of different presidents. So, that's one strong piece I wanted to mention. And then two others that I wanted to say is just yesterday, Governor Healey signed bills on healthcare. And, you know, healthcare is something that every individual in the state, you know, deals with. You know, one of the parts of the legislation was that no one will pay out of pocket a copay more than $25 for medication, which is a great success. And there's going to be a lot more scrutiny and oversight over healthcare facilities. I think kind of looking at what happened with oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the Stewart Medical. So that's very important. And then one other thing I'd like to mention is also that has come through, I believe it was November 20th, that the bill was signed by our governor. And that was the economic development bill. And that's economic development to assist, you know, one thing that does is assists a lot of small businesses, there's grants, there's monies. I can't speak to it in great detail, but I do know from reading it over, looking at it a little bit, and also just knowing the Commonwealth, 45% of the Commonwealth businesses are small businesses. So I know, you know, employment is always a major concern for all folks with disabilities, including those with IDD or autism. So, you know, those are just some of my thoughts at this point. So I hope that's kind of helpful. Number one, to, you know, not get too far ahead of ourselves. And number two, that there's some good things that are being done in our state to protect individuals that may have some vulnerabilities socially. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Commissioner, did you want to add anything on that question, or?
I think both the Undersecretary and Director McCauley covered it pretty well. I mean, I think that transitions are always difficult for people. The unknown is always difficult for people, but our commitment hasn't changed. Our commitment didn't change the day after the election. It's not going to change on January 21st. And we're going to keep doing the work that we do to support people with disabilities. And you know, we have to work within the frameworks that we have, and we're going to keep a close eye on things as they change. But we remain committed to supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Thank you. Julia, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, but I think you know, one important theme from what Director McCauley said was that, you know, we're going to be here to translate things too. So if things are happening at the federal level, we're here to help folks in the community understand what might be changing, what might be staying the same. And, you know, we're really looking forward to continuing to be that translator and that sort of connection between what might be happening at the federal level, at the state level, so that people know, you know, what the status is at any given time.
Right. Yeah.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. I think what's really important to our community right now is clarity. And the other takeaways that I got from all of you were really around this really important piece, which is the transparency and the communication. That means so much to us. It means a lot to us as an advocacy organization, but I know the community as well. And then the other piece that you mentioned was really around collaboration. And I think we're here for that, but also the commitment of the community is clear. You have over 600 people here today wondering how we can work together. So I think those were really important takeaways from your messages. So thank you. And I'll jump right into, I really do appreciate not panicking around things that haven't happened yet. But I think as we look at some of the, I don't know, promises made around the campaign trail, we are a little bit worried about, especially Medicaid funding. You know, Medicaid is sort of our foundation for people with disabilities, and 75 to 80% of people really rely on Medicaid. Here in this state, we have struggled in the last couple of years too, worrying about funding coming in on a state level for Mass Health and some of our LTSS programs. But now we're really concerned. We don't want to see caps. We're worried about the Affordable Care Act and how we might be affected by that. But just in general, home and community-based services is so critical to us. And this is, part and parcel to Medicaid. So does anyone want to jump in on that, if that was a clear enough question? Maybe how will Massachusetts bolster our own Mass Health and our own home and community-based services?
Well, maybe I'll kick it off, and I'm going to warn Sarah that I'm going to hand it over to talk a little bit about specifically to DDS. I appreciate, sort of the comments, because, as we keep saying, it is so hard because there are so many questions and we don't exactly know what direction folks are going to take. So the one thing that I do want people to remember when it comes to Medicaid is there are lots of states in this country that benefit from Medicaid expansion, and the ACA for that matter. Particularly the provisions as it relates to existing conditions. So, when I hear the concerns, I really do want people to realize we are not alone in this. We have a lot of other states that have an investment in this. When I think about moving forward, I think it's really important as a new administration comes in, and again, whether it's, whoever comes in, to really work to find common ground. Where can we partner, and what are those issues that we share? I think increasing public awareness, particularly as it comes to Medicaid, which is why I'm going to hand it to the commissioner, that people have a real understanding of just how those resources support so many different populations here in Massachusetts. So with that, maybe I'll ask Commissioner Peterson to say a few words about Medicaid and its role at DDS.
Sure. Yeah, so DDS operates a number of waivers, HCBS waivers, that in partnership with the federal government. And, to the Undersecretary's point, Massachusetts is one of 47 states that operates IDD waivers. And so, this really, I hope that I'm hopeful that the incoming administration will really see this as a human issue and not a partisan issue, because, we're talking about a huge segment of the country that would potentially be impacted, particularly when it comes to waiver services. I was actually just reading something the other day that said that 75% of Americans view Medicaid positively. And so I think that in terms of, public backlash, if there were major changes to the existing system, I think that we can count on the fact that if there is overwhelming bipartisan support for these programs, that they're going to remain intact. I also wanted to just mention, broader than just the waiver services that DDS operates. Most people know someone who has been impacted by Medicaid, whether that is for nursing home funding for, older adults, whether it is, gap coverage for children or family members, or whether it is in terms of services for people with disabilities. The majority of Americans have some experience, either personally or through somebody who they know or care about, that relates back to Medicaid. And so, I think that one of the things to think about that is a little bit unusual in terms of the circumstances that we have now, because transitions are always difficult. We're in the unusual circumstance right now of having an upcoming transition in terms of administration, but one that we have been through before. And, largely when it comes to these waiver-based services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the services that make sure that they are able to, have residential services and others that we've talked about, those have remained intact through a number of transitions, and I'm really hopeful that they will remain intact and that we will be well prepared if there are any kind of threats to those remaining intact as we see the transition underway.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm hearing from both of you that this is just broader than just us, but that you have that lens for IDD and autism, which is really what we were hoping for going into this, that we'll stay on your radar, that will be a top priority, because we know human rights in general, we need to do make sure we're protecting, but making sure people with disabilities are at the table and have that voice. Director Macaulay or Julia, did you want to add anything there?
Not from me. No, I
Okay.
think everything was said nicely.
Okay, that's great. I think that this is a perfect time then to transition over to taking some questions from the community. I think they will have just invaluable comments and questions for you all. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Nora because she's been looking already to pull out a few questions.
Okay.
Thanks, Nora.
Thanks, Maura. There are some amazing questions in the Q&A, so please keep adding them in and we'll get to as many as we can, but we'll keep track of the ones we can't answer and make sure we include those in our work moving forward. The first question I want to ask is actually a combination of a bunch of questions in the chat and goes back to a point that Director Macaulay and Julia made earlier about translating what all of this means. So I'm going to ask a pretty wonky, in-the-weeds question about, can you all explain kind of how the combination of federal funding and state funding comes together to support this community, fund these programs, and what the real threat is? What could actually be cut? What are we kind of taking it back to? What are we talking about here? How do these systems work together?
I could start that. It's complicated. I'll start by saying that. And, if someone, doesn't have a lot of knowledge or deep understanding of government, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know, to tell you the truth. Like, for instance, the federal government, just in one area, let's specifically employment, vocational rehabilitation, which is, where I came from for a long time, working vocational rehabilitation, basically helping individuals with all types of disabilities towards employment. Those monies come from the Rehabilitation Services Administration, which is a federal agency under Department of Education. So there are many programs and services that the state, gets money for things. It's grant money, or it's coming through from a various, executive office on the federal level. Some of our money, even just in this agency alone, Massachusetts Office on Disability, we have a operating budget, which is from Massachusetts. And then we cover, like, one of our programs is grant money. Another program is federally funded. So as far as how things are coming through, I couldn't say an overall statistical equation as far as how much is from the federal. I can say it for vocational rehabilitation was approximately 80% was from the federal government, 20% was from the state. So, but there's various levers in government and areas that are complex and multi-leveled. And that's an important thing to say. If I could just end with this, and then I'll let Julia speak. She's our general counsel, and she knows the law better than me as far as being specific to the legal side of things. But the last thing I want to mention is that there's the complexity means that if, for instance, something may have been stated on the campaign trail, it could be a fairly simple statement, but that simple statement would need multiple actions at a variety of levels to make it happen. So that's an important thing to realize as well. It's that, statements and various things that may have been said, that's why we have to kind of wait and see what is going to happen, exactly how it's going to happen, because there's just a lot of levels, a lot of players, and monies that come from a variety of pockets, whether it's through the federal government, through the state, or through private public partnerships. So I guess that's it for me as far as that goes, but I don't know, what do you want to add, Julia?
I'm going to defer to Commissioner Peterson on this. She's the Medicaid expert.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with much of what Director McCauley said in terms of this isn't a decision that one person can make and implement. It is an incredibly, the combination of state and federal dollars and as well as grants that go into a number of the programs that we're talking about here would require a significant coordination of efforts. It's not anything that ever could happen on day 1, day 10, day 30. We really would have to see significant across the branches of government action in order for there to be a meaningful impact. And I think that one of the things that we also should think about in terms of advocacy and what we have here in Massachusetts is, the ability for people like Julia to step in or refer when it comes to if we think that there is overstepping at the federal level in terms of what people's rights are, to advocate for people with disabilities in the third branch of government that we haven't talked about much today, in terms of kind of all three are really involved, and it's a complicated question, but it's definitely not a day one or first quarter concern for anybody that there would be changes that would happen right out of the gate.
Thank you so much for those answers. The next question is also one that has been asked a few different times in a few different ways. So I'm going to try to summarize it in a two-part question about immigration. One of the areas that we at the ARC and many in our community are particularly concerned about is potential changes to immigration and humanitarian programs at the federal level. We know that the human service sector is in the midst of a significant workforce crisis, and that a good portion of that workforce is made up by immigrants and new arrivals to the state. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. But then another question came up. Can you address special considerations for the support of immigrant families impacted by disabilities? This person also asks, how can we all work together on this? Which is, I think, a theme that's coming up in a lot of your comments. So an immigration question about the workforce, but also for families with disabilities.
I'll start on sort of the workforce issue. And again, I always want to give people warning. I'm going to ask the commissioner to talk a little bit about maybe the pilot that we did do up at Hogan, just so that folks are aware of it. So when I talk about workforce, I actually have to start by just always expressing my deep gratitude to the entire workforce for everything they do every single day. They are such a critical part of what makes our communities strong and compassionate. And at the same time, I've heard from lots of our providers about their concerns about potential changes to immigration policies and the impact it will have on their own employees, as well as overall our workforce. So, and again, as you mentioned, we are very fortunate that newly arrived individuals have chosen this as their career path. So again, incredibly grateful. From our perspective, what we've been doing in partnering with our providers is to provide information, to meet with them, to make sure that folks understand what their individual rights are. Individuals who are here legally in our country have rights. And so we spend a lot of time with nuts and bolts so that people understand in the event that there is a knock on their door, what should they do? And it's everything from real concrete, like make sure your papers are in order. I mean, it's really, you know, just giving really basic information so that folks have an understanding, not to get nervous, but to take a deep breath and be prepared. At the same time, we've also provided them with additional resources of organizations that might be able to help. So there are immigrant advocacy organizations here that are available to provide support to these individuals. I'd also like Commissioner Peterson to talk a little bit about a specific project that we did have at DDS to encourage newly arrived to choose this as a workforce, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about the overall question, Sarah.
Sure, thank you. So we had a program in partnership with the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, whereby we had an intern class that came to the Hogan Regional Center up in Danvers and was trained to become direct service workers within Hogan. And that's wonderful for a number of reasons, both because we have a workforce shortage and we need people to enter into human services and fill those crucial roles. But that internship program was really immersive for people. So folks got immersive English proficiency education as part of that program, which will only help if, you know, a knock comes on their door to have those English language skills. Folks are also supported to get proper identification and in order to facilitate their work status. And of those graduates, all but one who is in the process of waiting to get their driver's license have been hired and are full-time employees now at Hogan Regional Center. And you know, the other kind of piece of that related to some of what we've already talked about in terms of community. An unexpected and really welcome impact of that project was that existing staff at Hogan who had similar cultural backgrounds to the people who came on board through this internship class really forged strong relationships with people and welcomed them not only into their work community, but into their communities more broadly. And I think that that sense of community and those partnerships helps in terms of asserting your rights, knowing your rights, and making sure that you're prepared if anyone tries to step on those rights. So I think that that's really important. We're hoping to expand that program to do another class at Hogan, but also to do a class at the Rentham Development Center. In terms of the other question related to supporting people with disabilities who are also, you know, newly arrived to the United States, our area offices always or often provide that support to people. We get those calls all the time. We got those calls 8 years ago about people who are nervous about what to do, and our service coordinators are trained to provide information and resources to people who are concerned. We also offer our own information in terms of what's available for our services in a number of languages, and want people to reach out to us if they're having a hard time accessing any of that information. And we do host webinars in, you know, on a number of our services. I know that there are monthly webinars on self-directed services, and they rotate those in a number of languages as well, so that people who speak English as a second language or have limited English proficiency can join those and learn about the services of the department. But I would just say to the person who asked the question, or anyone else who's listening, if you have questions about how the department can support you and that are co-related to these issues, just please reach out to your area office and let us know.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I'm so encouraged by that program that you did. I guess maybe our concern is that we want to continue to have access to that pipeline. And
Yeah.
so, how do we protect that pipeline and going forward? Because the reality is, here, and we're waiting on exact updated data or approximate data on the number of folks who are currently unserved in our adult population. So we're thinking it's probably down from last year by a good number, because we are seeing our vacancy rates go down. But we're probably still looking at a couple thousand adults who don't have access. So that growth of the workforce through that pipeline is so important. And I know that that's, not so much a federal issue, but it is in the long term around if immigration is kind of halted, and or if we stop getting funding for the workforce that is already in tough shape here. So I feel like that's kind of the reality of where we sit with those kind of overlaying worries.
Yeah, and that impact would be across a number of different industries too. I mean, I think that that's another important thing to
Yes.
keep in mind, that
Exactly.
the pipeline of workers in a number of industries would be impacted, and so I think it's another one of those issues that's much larger than Massachusetts or this particular workforce segment. It's one that we're keeping an eye on and concerned about, but I think when things span much broader, the impact, political impact or impact to people, is just so great that there's a lot of advocacy around it.
And I also just want to take a moment as you talk about broader issues, Commissioner. When I'm thinking about workforce, I also think about the importance of housing and transportation in this state, and it is absolutely a priority of Governor Healey. And I say it to my own staff, I say it to the provider community. We need to get behind all of those, because we can't keep people, we can't retain people, we can't recruit people if they can't afford to live here. So, we're important, but there are lots of other parts of our state government that we need to be supportive of to make sure that individuals can come here and live.
Wow, that just fits right into my
Right.
next question, which I'm going to jump right in on, because we're and it's directly from the Q&A. When we're talking about housing and really for our community, we're struggling with those who have profound autism. And I know that there is some kind of innovation going on around how do we serve those folks. And, maybe we can combine that with, how do we also provide housing for workforce, in some way. But I don't know if any of you could comment now on sort of, this increased complexity that we're seeing, throughout the lifespan. But I feel like it's kind of hitting hard right now with transition age,
Yeah.
and adults who really need that extra support because of complex, challenging behavior.
I'm happy to kick it off. I agree with you, and I have so many reactions to this, because on the one hand, I think it is a reflection of a really strong advocacy community that family members and individuals with autism have come to expect a certain level of care and services and supports and access to communities. And they're turning to us to say, how are we going to address this need? So I don't have an answer, but I agree with you. There are some really interesting opportunities or pilots or projects going on across the state that think a little differently about the way housing is provided for this community, for actually even defining what that community might look like. And I think it's all information that we need, that we do need to sort of reach out and begin to think about how can we bring that into our state. I think it too talks about collaboration. You know, there's obviously a role for DDS to be playing, but there are other state agencies, you know, and including education. You know, how do we really wrap around individuals, kids, and then throughout the lifespan, so that we're able to support them at every step of the way? It's, you know, it is not something that I have an answer for, but it is a priority for this administration. It's a priority for DDS. It's a priority for me to really begin to see some advancement on this. Commissioner, I don't know if you want to add a few words.
I was just going to say, I don't think that there has been a time that the undersecretary and I have spoken that we haven't talked about this issue. It's something that we think about all the time. It really, you know, we are trying to kind of thoughtfully think through opportunities to consider new ways of doing things. And, you know, I think we're both, we're dealing, you know, both with the issues that we've talked about in terms of, you know, Massachusetts being an expensive place to live, and there's a lack of affordable housing for people, and transportation is an issue at the same time that we have, you know, year after year, folks coming into our system who have more dynamic and complex needs. And so those two things together really, I think, just make the challenges more so, and requires us to really think of things in a different way, because those patterns, at least in terms of, you know, who's coming into our system, that pattern is very clear. It is the pattern that we've been seeing over several years now, and it's the pattern that we expect to see continue. And so we want to be well prepared for it.
I truly appreciate those answers and your commitment.
And one more thing I might just want to add, you know, when we talk about common ground, we're trying to think about ways that we can partner with the federal government. You know, the area of autism, you know, might be one area for advocacy. You know, when we think about research and what do we know, and it's, you know, I think there's an opportunity there, and I would really, you know, encourage folks to think about, is there a way to reach out to the federal government and see this as an area that deserves some research dollars.
Absolutely. I think that connects to our next question, Nora.
Yes, I'm gonna actually read word for word 2 questions from the chat, because they're both worded really perfectly to talk about advocacy. The first is, practically, what can members of this community do to help mitigate the risks and improve coverage and services? And the second one is, what are advocacy opportunities for those of us with developmental disabilities who want to stand up for our rights?
I can speak to that. You know, the advocacy opportunities are absolutely there. I mean, you know, ARC is a very, very strong player in advocacy for people with IDD and autism, and you know, also there's the Massachusetts Developmental Disability Council has trainings and assists individuals that may have intellectual developmental disabilities with some really good training about being an advocate. They have dates that they set up that individuals will go to the State House, and it's like an advocacy day for that specific segment of the disability population or community. And they'll go and speak directly to their state representatives or their senators after the meeting. And they learn how to bring up concerns directly. You know, I mean, none of us know things unless you learn them. So it's a nice opportunity for people within the community. And it's always, it's always helpful, extremely helpful, that a person, I believe, with the lived experience can go into lawmakers. You know, myself, I happen to be blind, and you know, I think if I bring something to the attention of a person. I'm not necessarily talking about legislators, but as I bring something to the attention of a person that has to do with blindness, I'm not an expert in blindness. I just happen to be one person that's blind, but I have the lived experience to be able to share my knowledge and my, my life living as a person that's blind. So I think that the lived experience is really strong, and there are trainings on advocacy. I believe there's other agencies too, private nonprofits, that have that type of training. So it's real positive. And I want to add one other thing as far as advocacy. There's the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts. The AG's office has a disability advisory group. And we at Mass Office on Disability joined that disability advisory group. And there are state players or members to that group. And there are also a lot of folks from private nonprofit industries. And we discussed this exact issue that we're talking about today is, different things and being prepared for new administration and so forth. And a lot of what we talked about is that our collective involvement with really trying to speak up for the community of the population of individuals with disabilities across the spectrum, that, we can do a lot of work together. And it's really important. And I think it's wonderful to know, and worth stating for anyone that may not be aware, that our current governor, Maura Healey, was the Attorney General of Massachusetts. And that alone, I think, really says a lot in a positive way about the current administration with her and the Lieutenant Governor, that she was coming from the Attorney General, and that's, where her background is. And, Lieutenant Governor coming from a municipality. It's important to also state. So I don't know if others want to join in on answering that.
I'll use this opportunity for a shameless plug, if that's okay. So at the department, we have a number of ways that people with lived experience, that's both individuals who are supported by the department as well as their family members, caregivers, can become engaged with us. So we have we have the statewide advisory committee. We have a number of committees that are specifically related to certain types of services we provide. We have a family support council. We have a self-direction advisory board. We have community advisory boards that are more at the local level. And the most important thing is that we have people with lived experience who are part of those groups. It is the most important seats to fill, in my opinion, are those seats. And we're doing right now an overview and a look at kind of all of those groups, where they are, what membership needs to be updated. And so if there are people who are looking for ways to get involved, in addition to working with the ARC of Massachusetts and working with Mass Advocates, Standing with Strong, working with other groups that you can partner with, I think that if you have an interest in becoming involved in one of those local or more statewide advisory groups that work with the department, please reach out to our ombudsperson. And I'll put the email address in the chat. But I think it's a great way to be engaged at a real local level that can have a meaningful impact.
Thank you, Commissioner, because it is a good reminder that your advocacy can also be directed at us. So thank you. I do want to just reiterate that the voices of family members and advocates is incredibly powerful in shaping policies and protecting and strengthening these essential services. I guess the only piece of advice that I might have is, to the extent that you can have a broad coalition, I think that's really, really helpful. Prior to becoming the Undersecretary of Human Services, I worked for a nonprofit, Massachusetts Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, MSPCC, and we had an advocacy division. And I took great pride at the time saying, you know, we didn't have to be the smartest people in the room, but we had to bring people together and convene people. And I felt then, and I continue to feel now, that our success at Advocacy was being able to show that we had a broad coalition that supported our efforts. So, you know, as people say, you know, you're important as one, but you are stronger as a group and together. So that would be my suggestion, you know, in your efforts to advocate and collaborate together.
I think those are excellent suggestions. With my 10 years of advocacy here at the ARC, I would 100% agree. We need everybody on board. And I'm sorry to interrupt now, but I think it would be important to wrap up, just because we do have a whole lot more questions in the chat that I will, if it's okay, and Nora and I can do this together, we'll combine and go through, and then we'll send them along to you all, so that if you can get back to us on these questions, we can have these to communicate out to the community. I think that would be really meaningful, because there's many, many more good suggestions, areas of consideration of geography in Massachusetts and how that can make housing and workforce even more complicated. People who are really struggling with transition. I think what's coming up now is sort of the real-time concerns, although, you know, the kind of overhang of the changes in federal government is there. We're also worried about what's happening kind of real time in our healthcare and in our long-term support services. So we will continue to work with you, but I do want to thank our excellent panel and just our brilliant community out there. I think we got a lot accomplished today. And really those takeaways are that you are open. Actually, you really want to hear from our community and to continue to work with us on any of these possible threats. And as you continue to bolster and safeguard Massachusetts, as you should. And I also think that you already have a very good sense of the challenges that we face, regardless of the administration. And that, you know, the key message here at the end, and good timing, is that we need to be stronger than ever in our advocacy. And I say that with this opportunity to have, you know, over 600 people on here, that the ARC really needs you all. We need your voice. We do need your numbers. And if you haven't filled out the letter for the governor, it's not too late. This is a letter that is really addressing a lot of the concerns that we're talking about today. And maybe Nora, you could put the link in, but if not, you can just go to our advocacy page at thearcofmass.org. Sign up for our notes. Get involved with the ARC. We have many trainings as well. And we really need you to participate in advocacy, to volunteer, to show up for these events that we have coming up. It's really powerful when there's 500 of us in one room, if you can imagine, and donate generously to this mission. So thank you to the Undersecretary, the Commissioner, Director, and Julia as well, and for all of you. So thanks so much, and everyone, please stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks, Nora.